And now, it's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're gonna dig this. It's the truth.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Benjamin Dixon Show, a special edition episode. I wanted to discuss, while the news was hot, Michael Flynn's resignation. This is not the full show, so I want you to be sure to download the full show from last night in addition to this. All right, so let's discuss. Michael Flynn, National Security Advisor for Donald Trump, has resigned after just 24 days on the job. He has resigned in the midst of allegations that he communicated with the Russian ambassador with regard to the Obama sanctions after the alleged Russian involvement in the 2016 election. There's a lot going on with the story, and I wanted to do this special edition this morning so that we can cover it. I had every intention of discussing the implications of, or the possibility rather, of Michael Flynn being given the can last night. But as with any other show, we ran out of time, and no sooner than we left the studio, we found out that Michael Flynn had in fact resigned. Now, why did he resign? So there are conversations that he had as he was the appointee or the designee for the National Security Advisor position. He had conversations with many leaders across the world, which is a part of the natural transition from between administrations. But during one of these conversations, he allegedly discussed the sanctions that President Obama had just placed on Russia about the 2016 election and their alleged involvement. And in these discussions, the implications of the takeaway, let's go with the takeaway that was the takeaway that the Russian official received, as well as the people who intercepted the conversation, was that the sanctions were Obama friendly. The sanctions were a sign that Obama was hostile towards Russia. And immediately after the conversation, or in the near proximity to the conversation, there was a surprising response from Vladimir Putin with regard to the sanctions of President Obama. You will recall that Vladimir Putin, stated that he was going to wait for the Trump administration before responding to the sanctions. And then subsequently, Donald Trump picked up on it, and as president-elect, he tweeted out that this was a very smart move by Russia and by Vladimir Putin. So there seems to be a direct line that's connecting Michael Flynn to the conversations about the U.S. sanctions and Vladimir Putin's response and Donald Trump's subsequent response to Vladimir Putin. But we'll get to that in a second. Now, in terms of what Michael Flynn actually did, Michael Flynn, the reason he has resigned is because he according to his letter, he did not fully inform Mike Pence, the vice president, and Donald Trump of the complete scope of his conversation with with the Russian ambassador. Now, of course, in his letter of resignation, he did not implicate himself as to having done something wrong or illegal. But there have been quite a few warnings from the Justice Department. Almost a month ago, Sally Yates, you would recall, she's the acting attorney general that refused to enforce the Muslim ban or refused to defend the Muslim ban in court. And she was subsequently fired by Donald Trump, which is absolutely within his right to do. But prior to all of that episode, Sally Yates warned President Trump that Michael Flynn was essentially vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians because of this conversation. Now, what's interesting about this, let's start here, how this information came out. It's because, as with all of our embassies, our spy agencies have tapped every communique that goes in and out, every conversation that goes in and out. And so the conversation that Michael Flynn had was clearly recorded by our spy agencies and by our internal intelligence agencies. I am not sure exactly which branch. We have so many different national security apparatuses, or whatever the plural of apparatus is. I'm not sure exactly which one captured the call, but it was captured, it was transcribed, and it was released to the people who needed to know. And it subsequently got into the hands of the Attorney General, or the Acting Attorney General. And as a result, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates tried to warn the White House a month ago of a potential violation of the Logan Act. Now, the Logan Act is essentially says that no private citizen, or it is illegal rather, for a private citizen to negotiate or work with foreign agencies, foreign countries rather, that the United States is currently involved in a conflict. And you can be prosecuted under that, and you can go to jail underneath the Logan Act. However, no one has gone to jail as of yet. Notwithstanding that fact, Sally Yates sent a warning to the White House a month ago, letting them know that Michael Flynn is vulnerable in this regard, that he's vulnerable, he's potentially has violated the Logan Act, and he is vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians. Now, I am not. You've been listening to my show for a while, so you know I'm not a part of the post-McCarthy, not even post-McCarthy, it's the neo-McCarthy era that the Democrats have lunged headlong into. Have you ever been a part of the Communist Party? That's exactly where the Democratic Party has been for the last couple of weeks, particularly around Donald Trump and this election. However, you cannot deny that this is a real story. You cannot deny the implications of this story, and you cannot deny that this has far-reaching ramifications, right? This really could go as far as President Trump himself, and this is why many Democrats, rightfully so, refuse to accept this as the end of the story. Now, before we go any further into the story, I do want to give one political piece of commentary. Utah Representative Jason Chaffetz has, we recall he is led the charge on the Benghazi, the Benghazi investigations, and I'm really looking for an adjective to describe the incessant nature of those investigations. I mean, they were never ceasing. They would still investigate it today if Hillary Clinton was president. He has claimed that this is it, that this is the end of the story, that Michael Flynn resigning is the end of the story. There's nothing else to see here, but that's not quite actually true. Because if you look at what I mentioned earlier, the connection between Michael Flynn having a conversation with the Russian ambassador, Vladimir Putin subsequently coming out saying they're going to wait instead of responding to President Obama's sanctions, they're going to wait for the Trump administration, and then Donald Trump's subsequent response saying Vladimir Putin is a smart man. There are connections there. The real question is, what exactly did they know, and when did they know it, to use a cliche? So here we are. The Republicans are trying to make this the end of the story. In fact, some Republicans are standing with Michael Flynn. There's an article in the Daily Caller, if you're brave enough to actually go over there and read that drivel, that discusses why we should get behind Michael Flynn, because this is an attack to weaken America. You even have a hashtag on Twitter discussing "I stand with Flynn," and you have a lot of people in there saying that this is an attack by the Democrats to try to undermine Donald Trump. Notwithstanding the fact that he confessed. Michael Flynn confessed to enough to justify his resignation, but not enough to actually have him charged. Perfectly written statement. I wouldn't expect anything less. I wouldn't expect anything more. He confessed to deceiving Vice President Michael Pence, who subsequently got on the news and started stating that there was nothing inappropriate discussed. Mike Pence went on with this story on all of the Sunday shows and several interviews, and it turns out that's not exactly what happened. Now, many people, and when I say many people, the political class, commentators, journalists, as well as some officials are stating that Mike Pence actually led the charge to get rid of Michael Flynn. Which makes sense, right? It makes sense because one or two things it actually happened. Michael Flynn just outright deceived the vice president, and the vice president got on television and made a fool of himself on behalf of Michael Flynn. Too many Mikes in this story. Or Mike Pence knew exactly what was going on. Mike Pence knew exactly what was said, and he went on television anyway, but somebody has to take the fall. It's not going to be the vice president. It's going to be Michael Flynn. either way it goes, this story is not over. There should be additional, even more investigation, because it really shows you the sloppiness. This is 24 days in. This is only 24 days in. And already we've had a high-level resignation. We talked about it last night, the Mar-a-Lago incident, where they were discussing the ballistic missile test by North Korea in front of random guests who were tweeting out and posting on Facebook images of his advisors, of Donald Trump's advisors, and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, his advisors, as they gathered around a table, and it was dark outside, so they used their cell phones to light up the intelligence briefings about North Korea. You had pictures of all of this going online, and in the middle of a potentially dangerous situation, an international incident. And so it shows you the sloppiness with which Donald Trump is carrying out his administration. So the investigation should go on, because it's very likely that this goes further. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong. It is rather satisfying to see this happen, because this is an administration that is putting America at risk. This is an administration that has no regard to any type of security, national security. I mean, Donald Trump wants the national security briefings reduced down. This is actually documented. He wants it reduced down to a single page with graphs, with pictures. So this is a place that we, if anything, Republicans should be confident about. It should be, or anything that they should stand behind, it should be this question of national security. Are they going to cede this to the Democrats? That's a fascinating proposition, that they're willing to cede the national security position, or ostensible position, because we've discussed previously that a lot of their decisions, even though it looks like it's in the interest of national security, it oftentimes is not. But they're willing to cede this position to the Democrats on behalf of a sloppy commander-in-chief, Donald Trump. Now, back to Michael Flynn. So he has resigned, and the investigations, or people are calling for investigations, yet the people who have the control over whether or not there's an actual investigation, Representative Jason Chaffetz and whoever in the Senate, whoever his counterpart is in the Senate, they are not looking to go any further. They want it to end here. There's another story that was in part of the Observer, observer.com, which is owned by Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law of President Trump. And this story, and I give you that background because the story actually is the opposite of what you would expect from an outlet that endorsed Donald Trump, and is owned by the son-in-law of Donald Trump, who is currently working in the White House with Donald Trump. But the story was written by John Schindler, and it's entitled "The Spy Revolt Against Trump Begins." And it begins to outline how spy agencies in the United States, American spy agencies, have decided to withhold key intelligence information from Donald Trump's White House because, one, he's not going to read it. We discussed how he does not take them seriously, and he wants them on a one-pager with images. And then two, it presents an opportunity for information to leak because as of January 20th, many of our spy agencies have concluded that that this information can easily be leaked to Russia if given to the White House. Now, I want you to think about that, because that has serious ramifications. And this is a story that was written by, it was written in a platform that is Donald Trump friendly, which in a way lends a little more credence to the story. Because if it was written because seriously, think about it. If it was written in a liberal rag, we would question it. We should and would question it even more. But it was also written by a former Navy officer who was a war college professor. He seems to be rather legit. And in context of everything else that's happening, it makes sense. So in this story, he discusses the conflict between the spy agencies, the intelligence rather agencies, and the Trump administration, because Donald Trump used the intelligence agencies as a scapegoat when discussing Russia's involvement in the 2016 election, and that created a divide. So there is somewhat of a level of a get back that's embedded in the story. And by get back, I mean the intelligence agencies are revolting. I mean, that's in the title, right? So the intelligence agencies are revolting against Donald Trump's attack on them as a means of defending Russia against their involvement or their alleged involvement in the 2016 election. All right, so that's how it starts. And as you read this article, you kind of understand why there's no coincidence that there was a leak. Donald Trump discussed that in a tweet this morning. He said the real story is about all of these quote unquote illegal leaks that are coming out of Washington. Well, the truth of the matter is this situation with Michael Flynn is an extension of them doing their job. Right? They're doing their jobs. Their job is to, and you can defend, hate, go against, want to destroy the so-called deep state, the intelligence agencies. But you cannot deny that Michael Flynn engaged in conversations that were troubling enough to the acting attorney general that she would warn Trump, to defend the White House. So something happened. Now, whether or not you want to destroy the deep state, that's a whole different conversation that you can have and we can have. Maybe I'll have it with you, but you can have it. But we should know whether or not top officials in the United States are engaged in inappropriate conversations with other nations. This does not mean that other nations are our enemy. It does not mean that we have to have a conflict with Russia. It doesn't mean that we have to start the neo-McCarthy era all over again, or we have to continue with the neo-McCarthyism of the Democratic Party that has popped up in this election. It does not mean any of that, but we can do both, and we can look substantively at the implications around Michael Flynn's inappropriate conversations undermining the sanctions of President Obama while President Obama was still president. And I say that to say this came about, this came about because the spy agencies released the information that they were listening to. They tapped the phone lines of all the embassies. I mean, this is an standard accepted practice that happens, and it was released. The release, however, seems to be a part of the revolt against Donald Trump. Now, when you oppose the deep state and you oppose Donald Trump, you sit back and you let them fight. You don't take the side of either one, in my opinion. So this is not lifting up the deep state. And I hate that phrase, right? It has such a conspiracy theory overtone. This is just the establishment. This is our bureaucracy. These are the people who work security and intelligence for years, career officials. This is their way of protecting, doing what they think is their job. Now, we'll argue about their job on another date, on another show. But for now, they see this as a means of protecting themselves, protecting America, and doing their job. And they overheard this conversation that they tapped, and they listened, they transcribed, and then they subsequently released. And the story in the Observer kind of makes it plain and makes it understandable, the impetus behind this release. Now, a part of that conversation, part of that article, rather, was that the National Security Agency and the advisors specifically prepare special reports for the president's eyes only. Every single day, there's a report that should be seen by the president. And because of that, the intelligence apparatus in the United States felt as though they could not provide that report. One, again, like I stated earlier, because Donald Trump doesn't read them. Two, because they felt like that the Kremlin had ears inside of the White House, not only in the White House, but in the Situation Room. And this is an exact quote from a senior Pentagon official who was unnamed. But we'll take it. So take it with a grain of salt. But again, this is inside of the Observer, which is owned by Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. The senior Pentagon official stated, quote, "Since January 20th, we have assumed that the Kremlin has ears inside of the situation room." And they said, quote, "There's not much the Russians don't know at this point." These are some serious accusations. And this represents a very, I don't want to overplay this, but I think it's more sloppiness than it is ill intent. I think this is Michael Flynn overplaying his hand, trying to gain the confidence of the Russians, maybe, but if nothing else, trying to prove a weakness in Obama and overplaying his hand and ultimately undermining himself and the United States of America. Right? So incompetence, while not necessarily nefarious, can have nefarious ramifications. I honestly think Michael Flynn was a buffoon, an idiot. And I say this not just because I think Donald Trump is an idiot, but I say this because if you look into his profile, he in his managerial style, there's been a lot of interviews I can't say papers, but articles written about Michael Flynn as a leader. And one of the ones that stands out the most was a profile of him by a civilian colleague who worked across from his desk, side by side with Michael Flynn for many years. And I heard the interview on NPR, and I can't think of the individual's name. I can't think of her, her exact position. So, with anything else that you listen to me, take it with a grain of salt and try to research it for yourself. But what she said stood out the most to me about anything else that has ever been said about Michael Flynn. When asked if he was qualified to lead, she busted out laughing. And she said he's not qualified to lead anything. And the reason was not an attack on him. The reason was because of how unorganized he was, the chaotic nature of his leadership style, the chaotic nature of how he organized himself, of how he carried himself. He was very reckless and not a qualified leader. That stands out to me because if anything else, whether or not you believe that people are passing around the image of him having dinner with Vladimir Putin. Everybody remembers that picture of Vladimir Putin at a table. I think there was a celebration for Russia Today, and Jill Stein was there as well. Everyone's looking at that image and saying, "Oh, see, here's the evidence. Oh, he was having dinner with Vladimir Putin." As though Michael Flynn was a Russian spy in the United States. I don't buy that at all. It's more likely that he was incompetent and reckless and got ahead of himself, as well as beside himself, and tried to flex his muscles that he was not authorized to flex at the time. And incompetence is not a defense, right? It doesn't make the implications any less damning, but it also does not say that he is a Russian spy who's here on behalf of the Kremlin. So there's a difference. There's a third route to analyze this on. There's the Democratic Party who are fully engaged in neo-McCarthyism. Then there's a Republican Party who says, "Oh, this is just an attack of the Democratic Party." And then there's the anti-Trumpers. Some people I know, some people I've hung out with, who look at this as this is just an attack on Trump, and this is an overreaction, or this is neoliberalism. So there's so many different angles to this. But the way I think we should look at this as an indication of the gross incompetence of Donald Trump and the people he's surrounding himself with, more than anything else. I do think on certain key policies, they have ill intent, very nefarious intentions, and they need to be stopped. But this particular story is more about Michael Flynn overstepping his authority at the time, speaking on behalf of something that he was not authorized to speak on, potentially deceiving Mike Pence. We'll let the investigation work itself out in that regard, whether or not Mike Pence actually knew what was going on. But more than anything else, I think this is just an indication of Michael Flynn's gross incompetence as a leader. Everyone who is a great soldier does not necessarily make a great leader. Okay, so that's it, folks. Be sure to check out the full episode from last night. If you haven't already, download it, and we will see you tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time live. You can call in 857-600-0518.